This episode is sponsored by Monkey Stuff. Monkey Stuff makes things for makers. We're inspired every day by the craft and creativity of makers and design and manufacture tools and accessories to try to make your making life a bit more delightful. Our products are designed in California, by makers and for makers, and manufactured in the USA. Check out our line of pottery accessories and tools at monkeystuff.com. Follow us on Instagram to see what we're up to in our studios, and keep on making great things.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode, we are happy to celebrate 50 years of providing the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us at NCECA for lots of deals at booth 607. Enter to win our gift certificate giveaway and meet template guru Jen Allen and rib master Troy Bungart. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com for all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters, by potters.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 565 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I am joined by Sam Briegel, who layers slipcast printed and painted fabric patterns on elegant porcelain forms. In our interview, we talk about the vessel as a metaphor for the body, the challenges of working with halloysite clays, and how her decorative process has become more refined over time. Sam will be one of the 12 artists presenting new work as a part of this year's Princeton Pottery Festival, which is happening May the 2nd and 3rd. If you'd like to find out more information, you can go to the link in the show notes, and I encourage you also to check out her website. That's SamanthaBriegel.com. Before we get to this episode, I also wanted to do a plug for the Red Clay Rambler community over on Patreon. If you become a supporter today, you have access to the Tales from the Vault podcast feed, which features dozens of episodes that are no longer available on major podcast apps, as well as special merch and other perks. I did want to thank a few folks that have been patrons, including Kathy King and Jan Herman DeBoer, for their support. If you'd like to become a patron today, you can go and make a pledge at patreon.com/redclayrambler. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So one of the metaphors, or the central metaphors of your work, is using the vessel, the pottery vessel, as a metaphor for the human body. So can you talk about how you originally kind of made that connection in your brain?
Let's see. This goes back to like when I was 9 years old, kind of a long time. I got a sewing machine for Christmas, and I always liked crafts and things. And so when I got the machine, I just like would take apart my clothes and kind of put them together. So there was this sort of like interest in clothing design, but that also relates to the body, right? I played with Barbies, also a body that I would make clothes for. So I had always sort of explored that like two-dimensional pattern over around body. And it wasn't till college when I took my first pottery class that I kind of I really connected with the process. And it was like, I took the class and that's it. But I grew up in the South, Tennessee, and always really liked pattern, and pattern often in clothing, and just really related to that relationship. And I really kind of never wanted to design clothes for my personal body. And so the vessel was the perfect thing to hold that, and has really proven to be, like, of course, in grad school, that became more identified and, like, clarified. And so that's been kind of an endless pursuit and exploration to like view the vessel as body container, nourishment also for the body, and just that relationship. And I hear a lot of potters talk about that. Like that isn't like a new idea, but it's kind of the way that I entered in navigating the form.
Yeah, and I think historically people often made anthropomorphic pots, like you make the body the pot. But what I like about yours is it's a couple steps removed. So what we're seeing is fabric patterns that are then either printed on or built into forms.
Yes.
One of the things that I love about your work is that you have this ability to balance very complex small motif patterns with each other without it looking crazy.
Well, I think there have been many years where it did look crazy. So,
So let's talk about that. How do you get it to not look crazy?
okay, this is an interesting question.
And maybe crazy is good. That's the other thing. Is like there is a density of your pattern design that I find to be very satisfying. So there's also like a question of taste in here.
Yes. And I think like I look at a lot of clothing. Like I enjoy, um, like I said, I'm drawn to patterns with a lot of texture and print. Um, and I do view it as sort of like, the fashion world is one I'm kind of not accessible, or it's not accessible to me. Um, but since graduate school, so I think I graduated in 2018. And that was like the first time I was actually casting like a lace print and actually using, like prior to that, I was kind of like painting or drawing the fabric prints instead of taking it directly from the clothes themselves. Um, and so since then, I have just been collecting prints and textures. And I kind of have two processes. Like one is like a plaster slab, and one is layers of screen prints. And that's been really fun to like just kind of have like 45 textures to choose from. And like, I don't know how many, like maybe 30-ish of those prints. And that's where the fun is in the studio is like, okay, how do I think that will look nice next to this one. And usually when I'm in the studio, I have like 4 or 5 slabs of clay that are kind of similar in color scheme that I can like cut and like quilt together in certain ways. Um, and right now the work feels like what I wanted it to look like, if that makes sense. Like I've been I've chosen the hardest path to this, using like the clay that I use and, slab building with porcelain and then adding the print on the slab of clay and then building with it. So like I can't touch it. And so all of those problems have really like the process is very much part of the work itself. Well, a lot of times the patterns like in the past haven't really worked together, but they do now. Like, and I think I'm very happy with how I'm like combining. Like, I'm looking at like repeated flower patterns. Like some of the laces have like a 6 flower that kind of matches this other print, and like it's yeah, that's sort of the fun part of like building the outfit in the vessel. That, but it relates to the clothes I make as well. Like amateur. I just make them for myself. But I've started to like, you know, instead of start with the clothing and deconstruct and then add it to the pots, I am getting the fabric, making a garment, and then now that's part of the work. And so that relationship is like very much a part of, the fun and the process working in the studio.
I was talking with Dallas Wooten, our mutual friend, before
Yes.
this, and he said that you'll often show up to shows in the dress or in a piece of garment that's matching the work. And
I have started to do this, yes.
Yeah. That's great. Because I feel like that it makes, because I think for us as potters, we're always trying to figure like, how do we make people live with pots in a different way? And clothes are the way, like we live with clothes every day. Like they have solved
They're touching
it.
us. They're in the photos that we remember events. Like I guess like I always joke, like I didn't go very far for my inspiration. I just sort of like looked down. But they can make you feel very powerful, but they can also make you feel really terrible. And like I think I gravitate to the kind of negative, terrible feelings and reclaim identities of those and like make them more positive. So I think sometimes, probably due to my own like not like sharing the work as an artist, but I think some people kind of miss the art of what I'm doing, where like it's a beautiful thing, but then like behind it there's sort of like stories, and it's catharsis sometimes. Like when I'm making the texture, I'm like cutting the dress apart and like pouring plaster over it, which then kind of ruins it, but then changes it. And um, that cycle is important to me. And yeah, I'm actually about to like make textures of my cheerleading uniforms that I'm kind of excited about. So that's kind of like a future thing that we'll see how that goes.
Do you mind if I ask you questions about body image?
I don't. Yeah, I'm pretty open about it. I recognize though that like I never want to present that like I have figured it out. Like I think there's so many there's a lot of messaging throughout my life about this. Like I think I grew up in a really kind of critical aspect of like body. Even like cheerleading was very, you know, aesthetic forward, and the South. And so there's, the body positive movement, then there's body neutrality, and there's all these different ways that you should feel about it that I don't try to answer, but just try to acknowledge that bodies change over your lifetime. And yeah, I'm very comfortable talking about it. So
yeah, in your artist statement, you said that your work lies between the tension between self-acceptance and social expectations. And I think that's interesting because that's a tension that we all play back and forth with, whether we're conscious of it or not. So can you talk about how clothing has allowed you to be empowered in your own body?
yes, I mean, so on audio you can't tell, but if you've met me, like I'm like 4'11", and standardized clothing has really never fit or correctly proportionately. I do think that my interest in learning how to sew very much made me feel in control of changes and alteration. So like I always hemmed my jeans or took in clothes, and I think it empowered me to feel in control of that instead of like the clothes representing like a body I should have or can't have. And so in grad school, I think the pivotal moment in this work was when like I had this like section of my wardrobe, the goal clothes. Like I'll wear these one day when I do this and change my life entirely, which is kind of like unrealistic and maybe harmful. And so that was what I tried, like I started to kind of interrogate that and cut it apart and like rework it. And I think when I do make autobiographical work, which like when I talk about it, I think a lot of people do connect with that. And, um, you're always trying to find like how your experience as an artist relates to other people's experience. And every time I mention the gold clothes, like I have like a lot of people audibly be like, oh yeah, totally. So, yeah, I think it's also record keeping, like that through as bodies change, the acceptance of like, oh, I can't really wear this anymore, but I still love it and it's important to me. And so, like, how do I, capture that imprint? And I've done that with like friends' wedding dresses and like kind of other stories involved in that. And um, did I answer that
You did.
question?
And,
Okay.
yeah. And the follow-up is you'd mentioned that making the pots has actually been cathartic because that's allowed control in I would say maybe even a more objective way, because the pot's always separate from you. So you can design in a way that doesn't necessarily hit the sore points of the lack of self-acceptance that we all share as humans.
Yeah, I do think it is it's intentional that it is separate from me. I think like I get to have all the fun of like dressing up without actually having to be the one in the limelight in a way. And the vessel or yeah, vessel is kind of like the model that I'm like designing for that I enjoy. And I think there's also like, pots are connected to food. Like we eat out of them. And like that is also kind of a heavy relationship sometimes with people who, have complicated relationships with food. Like I think so an example of how that shows up in the form of my work is recently I've started to put like a rattle in the lids of all my jars, cookie jars, so that like when you take a cookie, you're like announcing that you're taking it. I have memories of like carefully taking the lid off and like and so like the
Me too.
sneaking, and so instead I'm like trying to change that, and so I'm looking at ways in which I can use the vessel and certain forms to like celebrate too. Um, yeah, and I think that's been fun as well to kind of investigate like, oh, how do I or what specific objects make sense for this like pattern and form. I I often gravitate towards forms that are like bigger, like voluptuous sort of. Like a lot of my forms have like waistbands, you can kind of tell. Um, so that's how I'm kind of adding that in as well.
Years ago, probably 25 years ago, I took a workshop with Kristen Kiefer, and she also works a lot around clothing and the idea of restriction, like corseting. Like she had this whole series of corseted flower vases. And one of the things she was teaching me or teaching the class, and I really got a lot out of, is she was talking about that what makes something soft is a balance between inward pressure and outward pressure. So a waistband is an exact example of that. It's like something is restricting, but it also makes everything look softer, as to where if you have a dress that has no waistband, it does not have the same softness. So can you talk about, as a hand builder, and I know you throw and do work with cast parts as well, but as someone who's constructing these pots, how do you kind of balance that inward constriction and then the outward pressure to make things look soft?
Yes. Okay. This is also a long answer.
That was a
as,
long question, so feel
yeah,
free.
yeah. No, like also a side note, I ran into Garth Johnson at the Flower City pottery show. He looks at my table. He's like, "You have a complicated mind." And I was like, "I really do think that sums it up." Okay, so like the thrown elements give me like a base to kind of tether the piece to. And I'm really looking at like two-dimensional clothing patterns for how the pattern has draped over a body, like a circle skirt, or that like cone arc is really important in my work. So that adds volume. And then where they connect is where I'm changing direction on through the planes. Um, and I'm kind of building them on the wheel tethered to that wheel thrown base. And because the porcelain is really finicky to work with, I'm also stretching it from the inside to disrupt the memory of the slab, but to also give it volume. And I started to add like sprig dimples, like pearls and flowers for like by pressing in, you're exaggerating that softness, I think. Um, and then that has evolved, or the the cone pattern that I'm dealing with, I've also started to stretch the patterns in that form, like to fit. So I'm trying to also stretch like the prints as well. But that has forced me to learn a lot more digital design and rendering. And so I think I've figured that out a bit more to kind of custom design the print to go on the pattern. So yeah, I think stretching from the interior on the wheel, which also compresses the clay, but it also allows for that like volume. And like the dimpling and things. The sprigs also were created to like really kind of hold the seams together, kind of like a rivet on a jean, and then they became decorative. So yeah, I've kind of gone through a lot of problem solving that make those things more intentional, but it is like kind of part of the process of making too.
You mentioned you build out of porcelain, which for people that have never worked with porcelain, even making a straight cylinder, it will shrink, warp, do all kinds of things. So you're basically doing about the hardest thing you could do with porcelain. So
Correct.
Talk to me about why the materiality of the porcelain itself is important to you.
I think ever since I like used it in undergrad, porcelain, and we were a cone tin reduction only like studio. And so moving to cone 6 gave me the color options that I wanted. But there aren't many good like porcelains in that cone 6 range. And when I found the frost, which is the clay body I use, which is
Oh my
people have
God,
actually
even harder.
I
That is
know,
like
I
the
know.
hardest. It's New Zealand kaolin porcelain. It's not even like Graulig kaolin porcelain.
Correct. Okay, so lace, sequins, the delicate fabrics, they're transparent, they're translucent. And so like materially that choice was pretty like clear that it needed to be that. And I often talk about like it's the difference between like polyester versus silk versus, rayon is like even the material matters so that it doesn't kind of look cheap. And it does, people are always like, oh, you should use a different clay, make your life easier. But when it works and I don't have to glaze it, it's like a material of its own that's like really like captivating. And there's a lot of failure involved, but it's just such a beautiful clay body that I kind of can't break up with it. But I think the fraught relationship I have with the clay body also is parallel to the relationship I have with like my body and clothing. And so like I don't often talk about that, but um that resilience is like very important, I think, in the problem solving in the work is that clay body being so temperamental also kind of represents that struggle too. Like, and so that's how I'm justifying it. Yep. But I recently, I've been doing a lot of the like pottery invitationals and, I'm excited to do the Princeton one or Princeton Pottery Festival, correct?
Yes, Pottery Festival. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Cool. And you just get to be around amazing potters who are making beautiful work. And I gave a demo at the American Pottery Festival in Minneapolis. And afterwards, Bertie Boone comes up to me and is like, how much do you know about that halloysite, like the New Zealand kaolin? And I was like, not much. And she's like telling me that like so before this conversation, I would tell people like, this clay it's kind of not like clay. It doesn't really have properties that like the cracks it forms are very unique, and it kind of crumbles instead of cuts. Like there's a lot. Trimming is difficult, and so I like to kind of explain like even if you've used porcelain, this is very different. And I was working through that in the studio, but not really understanding like microscopically, it's actually different. Like the hexagonal discs of regular clay, this one has tubes. So I was learning that, or then I started to research that, and I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And she was like, you're building with it in a way that works with that too. So I've kind of figured it out like in the studio. Even like diagonal seams, distribute the tension and don't crack as much as like a vertical seam or so the clay very much relates to like the work I'm able to make and how I'm doing that.
Well, I love to hear about this embrace of suffering, because this is
Hmm.
this is something that artists do. Like, I remember however long ago I interviewed Brett Kern, and we were laughing about, like, if a project doesn't have enough suffering or enough struggle, it's boring. Like,
Hmm.
it doesn't seem satisfying. And then on the flip side, if there's a lot of struggle and you conquer it, it's almost transcendent.
Yeah, and I'm like definitely on a journey to that transcendence. Um, Another thing I'm going to mention, which sometimes doesn't always come up, but when I was in grad school, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. I'm very open about it. It was kind of a like a wake up call of like, you might have to change some things in your life. And so as much as like the work really isn't about that, it is kind of an undertone of it. And I think I still want to have that excitement in the studio. Like to me, I haven't really given up the struggling with the clay body because like that's like what makes it interesting to me and figuring it out. But yeah, what I've been trying to do is like maybe make those like challenges a bit smaller, like I'm incrementally upping the challenge instead of like, you know, making it a crazy big thing that is a risk. Um, so I've gradually been kind of like figuring it out. But now that I know the clay body, I'm very aware of like what I can do with it. And I've started to make a lot of bisque molds that I'm able to kind of drape things over top and like work with, and it helps. But yeah, I've always been really curious in the studio and embracing like play. And I think that this work really like shows the exploration that I like to do. It's hard for me to make the same thing over and over. um, so always searching for that dopamine of I figured this out, and that's a really amazing feeling.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. So if we were all really smart business people, we would struggle, figure things out, and then get someone else to make the correct solution and then sell thousands of them to the public. But I don't find that we do that. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like, speaking for myself, I'll figure something out and then I'll lose interest. For you, how do you maintain interest in the sake of business? Because like we are making a living selling pots. So how long do you like hold on to a good idea that people like before moving on to something else?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. I'm not sure I'm like the one who, like I said, has figured that one out. But when I was right out of undergrad at UT, I did an internship at the Bray, which was kind of this amazing. It's where I met Chris, and it was like Adam Field, Sunshine Cobb, Giselle Hicks, like all of the people in the magazines who I like love their work so much and fangirled over. And then I was there and could like learn from them. Um, and Zemmer Pellet was one of them as well. And I think her and I became friends, and she had said, "You figured it out. Don't change it. Like keep like working on that work." And I felt that that was a really important, some important advice to hear. And although I don't always take that advice, I have kept the work, like since I'm making two-dimensional patterns, I can stick with that and make that form over and over again. And I am revisiting older like prints that I know people like that I'll kind of make again, but still be able to explore a couple other things. So I think I don't know if that ex- describes that, answers that question, but yeah, I could do more of making what people like as well, I think. But I am a part-time instructor at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And so I have a little bit more freedom in like, not solely having to make a living. I'd say it's about 50-50, or every year has kind of changed. So it's hard to say, but it does allow me to have a little more freedom and exploration. There's definitely some projects I haven't done because I'm trying to prioritize like making pieces that people want to buy. Like the mug, how many mugs am I going to make? And then I can't even like make one that's the same. It's like I like to keep changing the design. But once I have the texture and the print, like I do have the ability to kind of like change the pattern slightly and make alterations, but without feeling like I've given up the whole process.
Well, taking a nod back from the fashion world, I think what fashion is good in is to make things that are kind of dual purpose. Like there's, I don't want to say normal clothes, but like if you go into any store in any mall.
We'll call this ready to wear.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And then there's also kind of the next version, middle of the road, which is the higher end of ready to wear. But then there's also couture fashion that's like just it's almost theoretical fashion,
Mm-hmm.
So as a potter, I feel like there's also room for that, like ready to wear pots, so to speak, and then something heading towards couture pots.
Yes. And like I only want to make the couture, but
Yes.
I also have to, I think designers probably do that as well. Like they probably get less out of, but I think maybe the ready to wear, and I'm going to say accessible, but I understand my price point isn't, but maybe pots are like a little bit more accessible than, or like the ready to wear ones. Um, I have added a lot more sparkle that I need to like tone it down on the sparkle. Which actually reminds me of so one of my grad school professors, Brad Schwieger, like him and I are very different in making. Like he's like very confident and here's this chunk of clay and I have sliced it and I'm done. And I'm over here like really I'm fussy with the clay. And I had a moment where I recently ran into him and was like, when I start to simplify the work, it stops being mine. And I think there's been like an acceptance of this is the kind of work that I make. And actually, when I'm making it less complicated, it's actually like less my work and aesthetic. So like I'm a full maximalist and I've accepted this. And even when I'm noticing like what pieces people are drawn to, they want the print and the texture. They don't want just the print. It's like, so I try to also like in this one small object, like maximize its comfort and excitement, I think. So each piece kind of holds all of that excitement in the round. And I think that's also why I like kind of working with this process is I can kind of piece together all these different things and you get to kind of have a lot of it in a small piece.
Yeah, and I wanted to delve in a little bit more to the technical parts of working with cast plaster slabs. There's a great video on your Instagram of you casting from an eyelet. So can you just talk about like first what an eyelet? People will know it when they see it, but can you just tell us what it actually is and then how you cast it?
It is a fabric with kind of holes in it. You could like there's lace, crochet, knit. I think they're described kind of interchangeably sometimes, but I think the eyelet is a print that has holes in it and kind of like a gridded or a circle or like kind of these basic motifs. And I think I'm always drawn to certain fabrics because like I'm aware of how they're going to translate into the plaster. And so I developed a process that I teach the workshops on and have kind of videos on that where I kind of have to stick it to a surface to pour plaster over it. Otherwise it's going to go through the holes. And this particular eyelet that I've been working with kind of has like areas that I can add like luster to, and kind of, I think I'm going to try to explain this. Like, although I am using fabric's likeness, right? I don't, once it's in the porcelain and the clay, it's not really fabric anymore. And so, I'm not really adding like stitch marks, or like how it's put together doesn't need to be like shown in that much of the fabric process. Like, I'm mostly using it as a print. Um, but the plaster slabs, they're about 11 inches by 17 inches, which is as big as I'm able to kind of manage. And I can fit a lot of different pattern pieces on that. So from one, I might have a skirt of a mug, sections of a plate, another part of a mug, maybe a vase. Like, so I've learned to kind of navigate that 11-inch by 17-inch size range. And I do try to look for prints and textures that are small enough so that the scale doesn't get lost. Because, if you have a really big floral print and you're trying to put it on this like very small form, you lose all detail of like what that is. So I've done a lot of problem solving to kind of figure out what scale makes sense for the fabric. Not sure if that totally answers the question about the plaster.
Well, once the fabric is cast into the plaster, then you're rolling, or you're taking clay and you're pressing it into the plaster slab so that when you pull it back off, it is essentially a 3-dimensional thing that you can build with.
Yes.
What have you found is the way to do this that keeps everything clean?
Lace pottery, I would say, is like also not an idea or something I made up. Like, you can use lace or any kind of fabric with texture you can roll it into the clay, and that gives you the negative of that, right? And like the impression. And I learned a monoprinting technique when I was an intern at the Bray from Chris Dufala. And he was doing a lot of like cast wood textures and like metal like prints. And a lot of my mentors and teachers have always been like, learn a process and then figure out how you can make that yours or adapt it to fit your interests. And so I took that like cast wood and was like, how do you do this if it's like fabric, and how do we kind of navigate that? And through trial and error, I kind of figured this out. But I knew that you could pour paint slip in details and then use a layer of wet slip and then add a slab of porcelain on top of that, kind of roll it onto it and kind of squish out the slip. Plaster dries it out a little, and then I'm able to kind of peel it off, and it's captured all of that detail because the slip has been painted into the texture.
Oh, I did not realize that's how. Okay.
Yes, and so sometimes you'll see like a black layer of lace and then a white background, and so that would be you paint the black slip in, sponge it away, a wet layer of slab of porcelain, and then the like a mono printing each time. But with the like only the white porcelain, like no color layers, I still add a layer of white slip because that gets the most texture out of it. So I could roll it in, but I want like all of that layers of texture. And then the plaster dries the top of the surface, and if I'm pulling it off in the right timing, it's still kind of like soft and I can use it. A question I often get is how I'm not messing up the texture or print. And my answer is always like patience and like carefully kind of working with it at the right consistency. I have a lot of damp boxes that kind of keep it all in that consistency. So yeah, that monoprinting technique. And I would also say, like in undergrad, I took an intaglio class, which is similar to like you're etching into a plate, like metal plate, and then the ink goes in the crevices and you wipe it away and then you print it and it kind of leaves like a raised line. And I think there's a lot of printmaking parallels in my work as well that I'm using to make that.
Well, to wrap up, I wanted to talk about work-life balance. You mentioned that you're dealing with a chronic illness, and so rest is important. There's no illness that stress makes better. So how do you balance, for instance, we're getting ready to be at the Princeton Pottery Festival together in May. How do you balance kind of the ramp up for a big show with the physical reality of like, you can't burn the midnight oil, like you have to rest, you have to eat right, you have to do these things that keep the body regulating itself?
I am not sure I can say that I'm doing it correctly. I do think, I am listening more like when I'm like, I don't think I should push this. Scheduling in like decompression time after a big event has been important to me. Like I can kind of maintain a big push, kilns. I don't know if I've ever like loaded a glazed kiln stress free.
Good point.
I think there are some things that are hard to get past. I do have a studio at my house, which allows me to kind of work, on and off throughout the day, even if it's not like a 9 to 5. So I'm kind of like breaking up the chunks of time that I'm working. But, after the Princeton Pottery Festival, I'm not going to do anything but I'm not going to schedule an event right after that because I have learned the hard way that I can't like sustain a back to back to back to back, which is actually difficult to sustain a career in the arts because I think a lot of us do that, like the workshop and the festival I'm actually starting to believe that the grind is like pretty unsustainable. And I think as someone who's good at problem solving, I'm still in the process of doing that. But I don't really, or I think maybe I'm in the process of learning to be realistic with that. Social media is also one of those that demands consistency, which is kind of counter to living a balanced life. And so I'm curious to see how trends change either in favor or not. I think you probably had a similar education that I did in just that studio potter life of like, here's how I maximize my efficiency in the studio and work really hard. Like I'm still battling that messaging of like, I'm not working hard enough. I think as a teacher of young people, what's really kind of, I think sometimes frustrating, but also positive is that they're very aware of that balance and they have limits. And I think I learned from them in like, I like teaching as well. I've learned that like, I think that part of my practice has like become also something I care about and I learn from is, some things I work in the studio because I was teaching it, or the digital things I've like added into the work because I've forced myself to learn it, to teach it. And I think the art students these days are very aware of that. I need to find a balance in life and not push it. And so I do respect them for that. But it is different than how I was taught.
Well, there was just like it was either a New Yorker article or New York Times, and they were talking about how older generations are looking at Gen Z and saying these kids are lazy. But what Gen Z has gotten better at is saying, no, work life is from 9 to 5, And after 5, I'm not going to work for the company or work for whatever, which as artists, we just throw that out the window. We tend to just work. So I'm like you. I think maybe they have figured it out. Like maybe this is having these boundaries is a positive thing.
Yeah, I think like moderation though, like I think like we've kind it's like you're like it's like swinging back, but I think like in the middle is where that's going to work. But I do think that I'm glad it's becoming more part of the conversation is that but as a potter it is very hard to, or just artists, to even like think that that is even attainable. And so that's I'm in my studio practice and life, I'm trying to do that. I don't always succeed, but I'm also okay if I don't. Or I'm trying to be really understanding when I can't, you know, respect it. But it is something I'm trying. I think it's helped my work a little bit because I tend to overcomplicate. And although it looks very complicated, I have like pulled back the reins.
I have one more question about kind of the psychology of rest. So a lot of times when we're resting, the whole idea is that we're not efficient, like we're not focused, we're relaxing, we're letting this letting our mind be at ease. But I also know that when I rest physically, my mind often turns on and I have a lot of really good ideas because I'm not moving, like I'm allowing my body to stay still and my mind gets active. Do you think there's a different creativity that comes from rest versus work?
I haven't learned to turn off the thoughts either. I think actually another reason why I've tried to learn more like digital processes like Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop is like in the moments where I can't maybe like push myself in the studio, I can still work through a creative project like on my computer. Even in rest, I still like to do projects like maybe home repair or something like that because my I like to keep my hands moving. But that is quite hard to turn off the mind, which is actually like I'm trying to view it as like that's what makes me an artist is like having this like flood of ideas all the time. I've never been in the studio and not had a direction to do next. I have like a cue, and I think that's a good thing sometimes. When instead of like, but as far as rest goes, that's a lot harder to do. Is like when you're have so many ideas. Um, how do you pick one? Or how do I think that that's something that I navigate in the studio as well. But I haven't figured out how to actually like rest fully. Sometimes moments in the studio are rest. Sometimes like there's parts of the process that I'm still kind of working, but I'm not like fully engaged, and I can kind of like. I guess that's meditation, but
Well, no, what feels like rest for one person is so different. Like my wife is always looking at me and going like, why can't you rest? Sometimes she'll ask me that. And the things that I find the most restful are just repetitious activities. Like that's so restful to me. So a lot of the studio work is really restful because it's a sense of self-soothing through the clay process. And actually through interviewing people, I found that this is a common denominator with a lot of artists that it is soothing to repeat these things.
yeah, I've really been interrogating like what draws me to being an artist, and like even as a kid, like being so like enveloped and intrigued by crafts. Like I was always doing a craft, even if it wasn't sewing. It's like I was doing like little bead animals or I guess yeah, self-soothing, but and then it's funny to grow up and like have a studio practice that is essentially like my craft room as a kid that I get to keep doing, and it does feel pretty essential to like my life and work is like that studio practice is very important and part of rest in a way, but it's like kind of active rest. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. Caveat. Not a life coach.
Well, to wrap up, can you leave your website and then also your Instagram or any social media you would like?
Sure. So my website is SamanthaBriegel.com. I go by Sam, but the website domain, I think Samantha was available. And then my Instagram is at Sam Briegel, and you can find me there. But I'm not posting all the time because I'm trying to rest.
Nice. That's good. Well, I look forward to seeing you in May. I hope people will come out and see us both in Princeton for the Pottery Festival. Yeah,
it'll be great to connect, and I'm looking forward to it for sure. Still got to make the work for it, so it'll all be new.
I'd like to thank Sam for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to chat with her about her work, and I'm looking forward to seeing a bunch of it in person at this year's Princeton Pottery Festival. Before we go, I wanted to take a minute and thank today's sponsors. That includes Monkey Stuff, the Rosenfeld Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, and Cornell Studio Supply. If you or your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor on the show, you can get in touch at talesoftheredclayrambler.com. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.